Hands up, sir. Step away from the vehicle. The words landed like a hammer on a quiet Dallas night, loud enough to turn heads across the valet lane of Blackstone Steakhouse, where polished cars lined up like trophies under the glow of golden street lamps and low jazz hummed through the air. Marcus Reynolds didn't move at first. He stood beside the deep obsidian Rolls-Royce Phantom, the engine still warm from the drive, the silver spirit of ecstasy glinting under the lights. He had just stepped out of a private dinner with city planners and investors, a meeting that would reshape 3 blocks of downtown, and yet now he looked like nothing more than a man in a black hoodie and dark jeans, keys in hand, calm as glass. The officer's hand hovered near his belt, not aggressive, not loud, but firm in the way authority becomes when it believes it's right. Sir, I said step away from the vehicle. Marcus lifted his eyes slowly, steady, unbothered, the way someone does when they've seen this moment play out before. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Around them, the night shifted. Conversations paused. Valets slowed their steps. A couple stepping out of a Mercedes paused mid-laugh, their smiles fading as they sensed tension in the air. The Rolls-Royce gleamed beside Marcus like a silent witness, its custom plates reading Reynolds 1, but the officer didn't look at the plate. He looked at Marcus. Whose car is this? The officer asked, his tone measured, not rude, but laced with doubt that didn't bother to hide. Marcus let the question sit there for a moment, heavy in the warm Texas air, before he spoke, his voice calm, low, and even. Mine. The officer gave a small nod, the kind that wasn't agreement, more like a mental note. We've had reports of a stolen luxury vehicle in the area. Matching description. His eyes drifted to the Rolls, then back to Marcus, lingering just a second too long, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit the image in his mind. Marcus could hear the murmur begin behind him, whispers that always came when situations like this unfolded in public, a quiet current of curiosity and discomfort weaving through the crowd. A valet with a neatly pressed vest took a step closer, his brows furrowed. Officer, I just brought that car around. The officer raised a hand, polite but dismissive. I'll handle it, sir. The valet hesitated, then stepped back, his expression tightening. Marcus didn't look at him. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes stayed on the officer, calm, unshaken, like someone who knew storms rarely lasted as long as people thought. The officer circled the car slowly, radio crackling softly at his shoulder, his flashlight beams sweeping across the polished chrome. The crowd grew thicker now, people drawn by the stillness of a moment that felt like it was about to break. A woman in a red dress lifted her phone, her lips pressed into a thin line, recording without saying a word. 2 businessmen near the entrance exchanged looks, the kind that said they'd seen something like this before and didn't like how it usually ended. Marcus stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, the city lights reflecting faintly in his eyes, the same eyes that had negotiated billion-dollar deals without raising their temperature. Sir, the officer said, stopping in front of him again, I'm going to need you to step back from the vehicle until we verify ownership. Marcus tilted his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the request without surrendering to its tone. I already told you, he said quietly. It's mine. The officer's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in the quiet insistence of someone who had already made up his mind. We hear that a lot. The words weren't sharp, but they carried weight. A subtle judgment wrapped in procedure. Marcus felt the familiar echo of old memories rise, not loud, just present, like a distant sound you couldn't ignore. Years ago, another parking lot, another car, another uniform asking the same question with the same doubt. He had been younger then, quicker to speak, quicker to defend. Now, he simply breathed in, slow and measured, the scent of leather and engine heat mixing with the faint aroma of grilled steak drifting from the restaurant behind him. The officer reached for his radio. Dispatch, I've got a possible match on the vehicle. Need confirmation on registration. The static reply crackled back, indistinct but official. Marcus watched the officer's face as he listened, saw the slight shift in his posture, the way authority adjusted itself in real time. More people gathered now, their curiosity growing louder in the quiet. A man in a gray suit whispered to his wife, "Isn't that Marcus Reynolds?" She squinted, unsure, her gaze flicking between the hoodie and the Rolls-Royce. her mind struggling to reconcile the image with the name she'd seen on headlines and magazine covers. Marcus heard them, but he didn't turn. He didn't need to. The truth had its own way of arriving. The officer's radio crackled again, a voice confirming the vehicle's registration to Reynolds Holdings LLC. The officer nodded slowly, then looked back at Marcus, a faint crease forming between his brows. "Sir, do you have identification?" Marcus reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black wallet, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. He handed over his ID. The officer took it, glancing at the name, then at Marcus, then back at the card, the silence stretching longer than it should have. The crowd leaned in, the air charged with anticipation, as if the moment itself was holding its breath. Marcus could feel the weight of their eyes, but it didn't shake him. He had built empires in rooms filled with doubt. A parking lot was just another room. The officer's expression softened slightly, uncertainty replacing certainty, but pride held him in place. "Marcus Reynolds," he said slowly, testing the name like it might taste different out loud. "That you?" Marcus met his gaze without blinking. "That's what the ID says." A faint ripple of murmurs moved through the onlookers, recognition spreading like light. The woman in red lowered her phone slightly, her eyes widening. The businessman straightened, suddenly aware of the gravity of what they were witnessing. The officer handed back the ID, his voice shifting, less firm now, more cautious. "Sir, you understand we have to follow protocol." Marcus nodded once, slow, deliberate. "I understand." The words weren't agreement. They were acknowledgement. A subtle difference, but a powerful one. The officer glanced at the Rolls-Royce again, then back at Marcus, the pieces finally aligning in a way he hadn't expected. "You can step away from the vehicle," he said, softer now. Marcus didn't move. Not yet. The silence stretched, thick and electric, as if the night itself was waiting for something else to happen, something unspoken. Because Marcus knew this moment wasn't over. Not yet. Not until the lesson behind it had a chance to speak. The air did not release its tension when the officer stepped back from Marcus. It tightened, subtle but undeniable, like a room that had just heard the first crack of thunder but knew the storm had not finished speaking. Marcus did not rush to open the door of the Rolls-Royce. He did not slide behind the wheel and drive away, even though he could have. Instead, he remained where he stood, the warm glow of the street lamps brushing against the smooth curve of the car beside him, the quiet hum of the engine fading into the night. He could feel the weight of the moment settling around him, not as something heavy, but as something deliberate, like a chess move placed carefully on the board. The officer shifted his stance, unsure whether the situation had resolved or simply paused. "You are free to go, sir," he said, his tone polite now, but still guarded, still holding onto the last thread of authority that had brought him here in the first place. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging the words without accepting their finality. He looked toward the restaurant entrance where a line of patrons had formed, their conversation suspended, their attention fixed on the quiet exchange unfolding under the Texas sky. Among them stood Emily Carter, her phone still raised, her eyes steady and observant. She had not lowered her camera when the officer softened his voice. She had not turned away when the murmurs shifted from suspicion to recognition. She watched the way Marcus stood, calm and composed, the way the situation bent around him without ever truly breaking his stillness. The officer cleared his throat, glancing toward his patrol car, then back at Marcus. "Again, I apologize for the inconvenience. We get a lot of calls in this area." The words hung in the air, careful and rehearsed, an explanation offered not as truth, but as habit. Marcus met his gaze, not with anger, not with resentment, but with something quieter, something deeper. "It is not the call that matters," he said softly. "It is the assumption." The officer did not respond. He did not argue. He simply nodded, the faintest acknowledgement of a truth that did not fit easily into protocol. Around them, the crowd shifted, the tension dissolving into a low hum of whispered conversation. A valet approached slowly, his steps measured, his voice respectful. "Mr. Reynolds, your table is ready whenever you are." Marcus offered him a small smile, one that carried gratitude without ceremony. "Thank you." He turned his attention back to the car, his reflection faintly visible in the polished black paint. And for a moment he saw not the billionaire developer, Not the man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and council meetings, but the younger version of himself, standing in a different parking lot, years ago, hearing the same tone of doubt wrapped in different words. He remembered the way it felt then, the tightness in his chest, the urge to prove, to explain, to justify his presence in spaces that had not been built with him in mind. He remembered the night he had promised himself that success would not change the world's perception overnight, but it would change the way he carried himself within it. The officer shifted again, as if waiting for Marcus to leave, to close the chapter and move on. But Marcus knew chapters like this were never about the moment alone. They were about what lingered afterward, about the unspoken lesson left behind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the screen lighting softly in the night. He did not call security. He did not call the restaurant manager. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Sophia Grant, his executive assistant. The woman who had watched him build empires from blueprints and empty lots, who understood that silence could carry more power than noise. The call connected quickly. "Sophia," he said, his voice calm, steady, as if he were discussing tomorrow's schedule rather than the moment that had just unfolded. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, her tone composed, attentive. "I need you to note the time and location," he said. "Blackstone Steakhouse, 10:23 p.m. There was a brief pause, the sound of typing on the other end. "Done," she said. "Is everything all right?" Marcus glanced at the officer, who now stood a few steps away, speaking quietly into his radio, the tension in his shoulders easing but not gone. "Everything is exactly as it needs to be," Marcus replied. "Prepare a statement for the morning. I will review it before 9. "Understood," Sophia said, her voice carrying the quiet efficiency that had helped steer his company through countless negotiations and public moments. "Do you want legal present?" Marcus looked around. The parking lot once more, at the people who had witnessed the exchange, at the officer who had not meant harm but had carried the weight of an assumption shaped by years of patterns, at the city lights flickering in the distance like silent witnesses. "No," he said. "Not tonight." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, the glow fading, the moment settling into stillness. The officer approached again, his expression softer now, almost apologetic. "Sir, is there anything else we can assist you with?" Marcus shook his head gently. "You already have." The officer hesitated, unsure whether the words were reassurance or reflection. He nodded once more, then turned toward his patrol car, the sound of the door closing echoing lightly in the night. As the car pulled away, its headlights sweeping across the pavement, the tension in the air finally began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet understanding that something significant had happened, even if no one had raised their voice. Marcus turned toward the restaurant entrance, the soft glow of the interior welcoming him back into the warmth of conversation and clinking glasses. Emily lowered her phone as he passed, offering him a small nod, not as a fan, not as a witness seeking acknowledgement, but as someone who understood the weight of what she had seen. Marcus returned the nod, a silent exchange of respect, and stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a gentle click. Inside, the world moved on as if nothing had happened, waiters gliding between tables, laughter rising and falling like waves, the scent of grilled steak and aged wine filling the air. But Marcus knew that moments like this did not disappear. They echoed, they reminded, they shaped. And as he took his seat at the table prepared for him, the city lights reflecting in the tall windows beside him, he knew that the lesson was not for the officer alone, nor for the crowd outside, but for the city itself, a quiet reminder that power did not always announce itself in tailored suits or grand entrances, that sometimes it stood in a hoodie beside a car, waiting patiently for the world to recognize it. Marcus did not rush through dinner, even though the moment outside still echoed in the back of his mind like a distant bell that refused to fade. He listened when the city planner spoke, nodded when the investors outlined timelines, and signed the final document with the same steady hand that had built his reputation over decades. To everyone at the table, he was composed, present, focused. But beneath that calm, something had shifted. Not anger, not frustration, but a quiet awareness that the night had not finished with him yet. When the meeting ended and the last glass of water was cleared from the table, Marcus stood, straightened the sleeve of his hoodie, and thanked everyone for their time. They thanked him in return, some with admiration, some with the polite distance reserved for powerful men. As he stepped back into the cool Dallas night, the city felt different. The valet greeted him again, respectful, careful with his words now that recognition had settled in. "Mr. Reynolds, your car is ready." Marcus nodded, offering the same calm acknowledgement he gave everyone, from executives to waiters to strangers on the street. He took the keys, the metal cool in his palm, and walked toward the Rolls-Royce, its sleek body reflecting the city lights like a mirror. The parking lot was quieter now. Most of the earlier crowd had dispersed, but not all. Emily Carter still stood near the edge of the valet lane, her phone lowered, her expression thoughtful rather than curious. She watched Marcus approach the car, her mind replaying the moment she had recorded, the way the officer's tone had shifted when the truth surfaced. She did not step closer. She did not ask questions. She simply observed, understanding that some moments did not need commentary to carry weight. Marcus paused beside the car, his reflection staring back at him, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the echo of the past fully. Not the pain, not the frustration, but the clarity that came from years of seeing patterns repeat themselves in different forms. He opened the door, the soft click of the handle sounding almost ceremonial, and settled into the driver's seat. The interior wrapped around him in quiet luxury, leather and polished wood carrying the faint scent of craftsmanship. He did not start the engine immediately. Instead, he rested his hands lightly on the steering wheel, his eyes drifting toward the skyline beyond the restaurant, where towers of glass and steel rose like silent witnesses to the lives unfolding beneath them. He thought about the first building he had ever bought, a rundown property on the south side of the city, the banks that had doubted him, the investors who had watched him closely, waiting for failure. He remembered the night he had stood on the rooftop of that building, looking out at the same skyline, promising himself that one day, his name would be part of it. Not for recognition, not for ego, but for change. The memory settled gently, like a hand on his shoulder, reminding him of how far he had come and how much still remained. Outside, Emily turned and began to walk away, her steps slow, her thoughts still with the moment she had witnessed. The officer's patrol car was gone now, its presence replaced by the ordinary rhythm of the city night. Cars pulled in and out of the lot. Laughter rose from the restaurant patio, and somewhere in the distance, music drifted through the air, soft and steady. Marcus started the engine, the Rolls-Royce coming to life with a quiet purr, smooth and controlled, much like the man behind the wheel. He pulled out of the valet lane, merging onto the street with effortless precision. The city lights stretched ahead of him, a ribbon of gold and white guiding his path through the night. As he drove, the events of the evening replayed in his mind, not as something dramatic, but as something familiar, another chapter in a story he had been living for years. He did not dwell on the officer's words or the crowd's whispers. Instead, he focused on the subtle shift that had occurred, the way recognition had transformed the atmosphere, the way respect had followed once identity was revealed. He knew that respect should not require revelation. That truth sat with him, steady and unyielding, like the foundation of a building that would never be seen but always held everything together. His phone buzzed softly on the console, the screen lighting up with a message from Sophia. Statement drafted. "We'll review in the morning." Marcus glanced at it briefly, then set the phone back down, his attention returning to the road. He drove through downtown, past the development sites that bore his company's logo, past the parks he had funded, the schools he had helped renovate, the neighborhoods that had grown under his vision. Each building was more than concrete and steel. It was a reminder that presence mattered, that influence extended beyond boardrooms and contracts, that real change was built one decision at a time. As he turned onto the quiet street leading to his penthouse, the city began to slow, the noise fading into a gentle hum. He parked in the underground garage, the space echoing softly as he stepped out of the car. The elevator ride up was silent, the glass walls reflecting the city's glow as he ascended. When the doors opened, the view from his living room stretched across the skyline, the lights of Dallas shimmering like stars brought down to earth. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city that had shaped him and that he, in turn, had helped shape. The night outside was calm now, but the lesson it carried lingered, quiet but powerful. Marcus did not feel anger toward the officer. He did not feel the need for confrontation or correction. What he felt was something deeper, something rooted in years of experience and understanding. He knew that change did not always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it came from quiet moments that forced reflection, from encounters that challenged assumptions without raising a voice. He walked to the window, the glass cool beneath his fingertips, and looked down at the streets below, where life continued without pause. Somewhere out there, people were still forming opinions based on appearances, still carrying beliefs shaped by habit and history. He could not change that in a single night, but he could continue to show, through his presence and his actions, that power and dignity did not always look the way the world expected them to. As he stood there, the city lights flickering like distant candles, Marcus felt a sense of purpose settle over him. Not heavy, not urgent, but steady, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The night had reminded him of something he had always known. Success did not erase bias. It did not shield against doubt. But it did provide a platform, a voice that could speak without shouting, a presence that could command respect without demanding it. And as the city of Dallas stretched out before him, alive and restless, Marcus Reynolds knew that tomorrow, like every day before it, would bring new challenges, new moments of clarity, and new opportunities to stand, calm and unwavering, in a world still learning how to see him clearly. Morning arrived in Dallas not with noise but with light, soft and steady, slipping through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Reynolds's penthouse and stretching across the polished floors like a quiet reminder that the city never truly slept. Marcus had been awake long before the sun reached the skyline. He stood by the window with a cup of black coffee, the warmth of it grounding him as he watched the early traffic begin to trace slow lines across the streets below. The events of the night before had not disturbed his rest, but they had settled into his thoughts, not as a burden, but as something unfinished, a conversation that had paused rather than ended. He had learned long ago that moments like that were not isolated. They were connected, threads in a larger pattern that revealed itself only when viewed with patience. His phone buzzed softly on the glass table behind him, the screen lighting with a message from Sophia. He did not turn immediately. He let the city fill his view for a few more seconds, letting the calm of the morning settle over him, before he walked back and picked up the phone. The message was simple. The statement is ready. Press has begun asking questions. Marcus read it once, then again, not for the words themselves, but for the rhythm beneath them. He knew what the statement would say. It would be measured, respectful, careful not to accuse, careful not to inflame. That was Sophia's strength. She understood that the truth could be delivered with dignity and still carry weight. Marcus typed back a single response. Schedule a meeting with the mayor at 10. Confirm with the city council chair. Within seconds, the typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, replaced by a reply. Confirmed. Marcus set the phone down and walked toward the kitchen, the quiet hum of the coffee machine blending with the faint sounds of the city outside. He poured another cup, the aroma rising in soft curls, and allowed himself to reflect on the road that had led him here. Not the financial deals or the buildings, but the moments like last night, the quiet tests of patience and composure that had shaped him more than any contract ever could. At 10, the conference room on the top floor of Reynolds Holdings was filled with familiar faces, men and women who had watched the city evolve under Marcus's vision and had learned to respect the quiet authority he carried. The mayor sat at the head of the table, his expression thoughtful, his hands folded as if holding back words that needed careful placement. "Marcus," he began, his voice calm but serious, "I heard about what happened last night." Marcus took his seat without ceremony, setting his coffee down beside a leather folder that remained unopened. "I expected you would," he replied, his tone even. The mayor nodded, his gaze steady. "The footage is already circulating. People are talking." Marcus did not react. He had expected that too. "Then let them talk," he said. "But let them listen as well." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of his words settling into the space. The city council chair, a woman known for her sharp mind and sharper instincts, leaned forward slightly. "Do you want to file a formal complaint?" she asked. "We can address this directly with the department." Marcus considered the question, not because he was unsure, but because he knew the answer required more than a simple response. "This is not about punishment," he said finally. "It is about understanding." The mayor studied him, recognizing the depth beneath the calm. "You are not angry," he observed. Marcus met his gaze, his expression steady. "Anger does not build," he said quietly. "It only reacts." The mayor exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "What do you need from us?" Marcus paused, letting the silence hold the room's attention. "I need you to ensure that every officer in this city understands the difference between protocol and perception," he said. "Because last night was not about a stolen car. It was about an assumption." The words were not spoken with force, but they carried clarity, the kind that left no room for misunderstanding. The council chair nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We can arrange additional training," she said. "Workshops on community awareness, on implicit bias." Marcus gave a small nod, not as approval, but as acknowledgement. "That would be a start," he said. "But more than that, I want them to see the city the way I see it." The mayor raised an eyebrow slightly. "And how is that?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his hands resting lightly on the table. "As a place where respect does not depend on recognition," he said. The room fell quiet again, not from discomfort, but from reflection. They understood what he meant. They had seen it, in different ways, in different moments, but never as clearly as he had lived it. The meeting continued, practical discussions blending with deeper conversations about policy and perception, about how a city could grow not only in size, but in understanding. Marcus spoke less than the others, but when he did, his words carried the weight of experience rather than theory. He did not ask for apologies. He did not ask for discipline. He asked for awareness, for a shift in the way authority saw the people it served. When the meeting ended, the mayor walked with him toward the elevator, the polished floors reflecting their steps in quiet symmetry. "You handled this with grace," the mayor said, his voice sincere. Marcus pressed the elevator button, the soft chime echoing in the hallway. "Grace is not weakness," he replied. "It is control." The mayor nodded, understanding the distinction. "The city is better because of you," he said. Marcus did not respond immediately. He stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding closed with a soft whisper. "The city is better because it learns," he said as the doors sealed. As the elevator descended, Marcus watched the floors pass in silent sequence, each level representing a different aspect of the work he had built, the partnerships he had formed, the lives he had touched. He thought of the officer from the night before, not as an antagonist, but as a reflection of a system still finding its balance. He knew that change did not happen in a single moment. It happened through conversations like the one he had just left, through decisions made quietly but consistently, through leaders who understood that power carried responsibility beyond profit and politics. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, sunlight streamed through the glass walls, bright and unfiltered, filling the space with warmth. Employees moved through the area with purpose, greeting Marcus with respectful nods, their admiration quiet but genuine. He stepped outside, the city greeting him with the steady rhythm of morning, traffic flowing, people moving, life continuing. He walked to his car, the Rolls-Royce waiting in its place like a silent partner, and for a moment, he rested his hand on the smooth surface of the hood, feeling the cool metal beneath his palm. He did not think of the night before as something negative. He thought of it as a reminder, a moment that had reinforced the reason he had built what he had built. Not for recognition, not for status, but for impact. He opened the door, settled into the seat, and started the engine, the quiet purr filling the space around him. As he drove away from the building, the city stretched ahead, alive with possibility, and Marcus Reynolds carried with him the same calm certainty that had guided him through every challenge, every doubt, every moment where the world had asked him to prove what he already knew. That respect, true respect, was not given freely. It was earned through presence, through patience, and through the quiet strength of never needing to raise your voice to be heard. By noon, the city had already begun to speak. Not loudly, not in outrage, but in that low, persistent murmur that travels faster than headlines and lasts longer than trends. Marcus Reynolds did not chase it. He did not scroll through social media or ask Sophia for a report on public sentiment. He knew how these moments moved. They started as whispers in boardrooms, in coffee shops, in quiet conversations between people who had witnessed something that did not sit right with them. The truth was not loud, but it was steady. It carried weight in the way still water reflects the sky more clearly than waves. Marcus drove through downtown with the calm focus that had guided him through countless negotiations and groundbreakings. The city did not look different on the surface. Glass towers still mirrored the Texas sun, traffic lights changed in their practiced rhythm, and construction cranes moved with slow authority across the skyline. But beneath that familiar motion, there was a shift. He could feel it the way you feel a storm hours before the first cloud appears, subtle but undeniable. When he pulled into the underground garage of the community center his foundation had built 5 years earlier, the quiet greeted him like an old friend. The center stood in a neighborhood that had once been overlooked, its brick walls warm under the afternoon light, its entrance open to anyone who needed it. Children's laughter echoed faintly from inside, the sound carrying the simple truth that spaces like this mattered more than any headline ever could. Marcus stepped out of the car and paused for a moment, looking up at the building. He remembered the day the first brick had been laid, the way the community had gathered not because they were told to, but because they believed in what it represented. Opportunity, respect, a place where no one had to prove they belonged. As he walked inside, the receptionist greeted him with a bright smile, the kind that came from recognition built over time rather than sudden fame. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds," she said. "The after-school program is in session." Marcus nodded, his expression softening as he listened to the distant sounds of children reading aloud, of tutors offering gentle guidance, of young voices learning confidence one sentence at a time. He moved through the hallway slowly, his steps quiet, not wanting to disrupt the rhythm of the space. This was where he found balance, not in boardrooms or city meetings, but in places where impact was measured in futures rather than numbers. In one of the classrooms, a young boy struggled over a math problem, his brow furrowed in concentration. The tutor sat beside him, patient and encouraging. Marcus watched for a moment, then stepped inside, kneeling beside the desk. "What part is giving you trouble?" he asked gently. The boy looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. "The fractions," he admitted. Marcus smiled, taking a pencil and guiding the boy through the steps, his voice calm, steady, turning confusion into clarity one line at a time. When the boy solved the problem, his face lit up with pride, and Marcus felt the quiet satisfaction that came not from success, but from shared understanding. Moments like that reminded him why he built, why he invested, why he chose patience over reaction. Outside, the city continued to hum with conversation about the night before. Local news outlets had begun to report on the incident, careful with their words, respectful in their tone. They spoke of protocol, of misunderstanding, of the importance of community relations. Marcus did not read the articles. He did not need to. He knew that the story would unfold in its own way, shaped by the people who had witnessed it, by the quiet truth that did not need to be defended. When he left the center later, that afternoon, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The air was warm, carrying the scent of summer, and the city felt alive with possibility. Marcus drove slowly, not in a hurry to reach any particular destination, allowing the rhythm of the streets to guide him. As he passed through neighborhoods that had grown alongside his developments, he saw the changes in small details. New storefronts, freshly painted homes, parks filled with families enjoying the evening light. Each sign of growth was a reminder that progress did not come from grand gestures alone, but from consistent, thoughtful action. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Sophia. He answered, his voice steady. "Yes. The mayor's office has confirmed a public address tomorrow," she said. "They want you present." Marcus considered the request, not as a demand, but as an opportunity. "I will be there," he replied. "Prepare the team." "Understood," Sophia said. "There is one more thing." Marcus waited. "The officer from last night has requested a meeting," she said. "Privately." Marcus did not respond immediately. He drove past a park where children chased each other through the grass, their laughter rising into the evening air. He thought of the officer not as a symbol of the system, but as an individual, shaped by experiences and expectations, by training and by habit. "Schedule it," he said finally. "Tomorrow, after the address." Sophia's tone softened slightly. "All right." The call ended, leaving Marcus alone with the quiet hum of the engine and the fading light of the day. He turned onto a road that overlooked the river, the water reflecting the sky in shimmering waves. He pulled over briefly, stepping out to feel the evening breeze against his face. The city stretched around him, alive and complex, filled with stories that intertwined in ways no one person could fully see. He did not feel burdened by responsibility. He felt grounded by it. The night before had not changed who he was. It had reminded him of why he remained who he was. As he stood there, watching the sun dip below the skyline, Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring new conversations, new perspectives, and perhaps new understanding. Not because he would demand it, but because he would continue to show it, quietly, consistently, in every space he entered. He returned to the car as the first stars began to appear, their faint light blending with the glow of the city. The engine started with its familiar hum, and as he drove back toward the heart of Dallas, Marcus Reynolds carried with him the same calm certainty that had guided him through every challenge. The world did not need him to shout. It needed him to stand, steady and clear, a presence that reminded it that respect was not something to be granted, but something to be recognized, always, in every moment, by everyone who chose to see. The night settled over Dallas like a quiet promise, soft and steady, carrying with it the lingering echoes of conversations that had begun to ripple through the city since the moment in the parking lot. Marcus Reynolds returned to his penthouse long after the streets had grown quieter, the skyline shimmering outside his windows like a reflection of everything he had built and everything he still intended to change. He did not turn on the lights immediately. He stood in the dim glow of the city, his hands resting lightly in his pockets, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the faint rhythm of a place that never truly slept. Moments like the one from the night before did not disturb his peace. They sharpened it. They reminded him of the difference between visibility and recognition, between being seen and being understood. His phone buzzed on the marble counter behind him, the sound gentle but persistent. He picked it up, already knowing who it would be. Sophia's voice came through calm and composed, the way it always did when something important had begun to unfold. Marcus, the meeting with the mayor has been confirmed for tomorrow morning at 9. The city council chair will be there as well. They have requested a private session before the public address. Marcus nodded, even though she could not see him. I will be there. There was a brief pause on the line, not from uncertainty, but from thought. The officer who approached you last night has also reached out again, Sophia continued. He has requested to speak with you personally, without media or department officials present. Marcus walked toward the window, the city stretching out beneath him, alive with stories he would never fully know but would always feel responsible for shaping in. Some way. Schedule it for after the address, he said. Let him speak when the city has already heard from us. Sophia's tone softened, not with sympathy, but with understanding. Of course. The call ended, leaving the quiet of the penthouse to settle around him again. Marcus poured himself a glass of water, the coolness grounding him as he moved through the space with the same unhurried confidence that had defined every step of his journey. He did not replay the night in his mind. He did not dwell on the officer's tone or the murmurs of the crowd. Instead, he thought about the conversation that was coming, about the chance to turn a moment of misunderstanding into something that could shift perspectives far beyond a single parking lot. The next morning arrived with a clear sky, the kind that made the city look both endless and intimate at the same time. Marcus dressed simply, choosing a tailored navy suit that reflected authority without excess, his presence always more about intention than appearance. When he stepped into the lobby of Reynolds Holdings, the staff greeted him with the quiet respect that came from years of shared purpose. They did not ask about the night before. They did not need to. They understood that his calm was not the absence of reaction, but the presence of control. The conference room on the top floor held a view of the entire downtown, glass walls framing the city like a living portrait. The mayor and the council chair were already seated when Marcus entered, their expressions thoughtful, their posture reflecting both respect and anticipation. The mayor stood, extending a hand. Marcus, thank you for coming. Marcus shook his hand, firm but unassuming. I appreciate the invitation. They sat, the city stretching out behind them in silent witness. The council chair spoke first, her voice measured. The footage from last night has circulated widely. People are asking questions, not only about what happened, but about what it represents. Marcus listened, his gaze steady. Then let us give them answers, he said. The mayor leaned forward slightly, his tone careful. We want to address this in a way that strengthens trust, not damages it. Marcus nodded. Trust is not fragile, he said quietly. It is shaped by how we respond when it is tested. The room fell into a thoughtful silence. They discussed the public address, the message it needed to carry, the balance between accountability and unity. Marcus did not demand apologies. He did not seek recognition. He spoke about awareness, about understanding that authority carried the responsibility to see beyond assumptions. Last night was not about me, he said. It was about perception. And perception, when left unchallenged, becomes policy. The mayor absorbed his words, the weight of them settling in his expression. You want change, he said. Marcus met his gaze. I want clarity, he replied. Change follows clarity. After the meeting, Marcus stood at the large window, looking out over the city that had shaped him and that he had shaped in return. The mayor approached quietly, standing beside him. You have built more than buildings, he said. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. I have built spaces, he replied. Spaces where people can see each other clearly. The mayor nodded, understanding the difference. When the public address began later that afternoon, the city gathered not in one place, but in many, screens flickering in offices, in homes, in cafes, the message reaching people in the quiet corners of their daily lives. Marcus stood beside the mayor, not as a symbol of conflict, but as a symbol of possibility. The mayor spoke about unity, about the importance of trust between the community and those who served it. When Marcus stepped forward, his presence was calm, his voice steady, carrying not accusation, but reflection. Respect is not a reaction, he said. It is a recognition. The words settled over the city, not loud, not forceful, but clear. He spoke about understanding, about seeing beyond the surface, about the power of listening. He did not mention the officer by name. He did not recount the details. He spoke about the moment as part of a larger story, one that the city itself was still writing. After the address, as the crowd dispersed and the city returned to its rhythm, Marcus walked back toward his car, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Sophia approached, her expression composed but thoughtful. He is waiting, she said softly. Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. Then let us listen. They walked together toward a quiet conference room where the officer stood alone, his uniform neat, his posture respectful but uncertain. When Marcus entered, the officer straightened, his voice low. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for agreeing to meet. Marcus took a seat across from him, his presence calm. You wanted to speak, he said. The officer nodded, his eyes steady but reflective. I wanted to understand, he said. Marcus listened, not interrupting, allowing the words to unfold naturally. The officer spoke about training, about protocol, about the moments when decisions were made quickly, based on patterns learned over years. He did not make excuses. He did not defend. He spoke with honesty, acknowledging the weight of what had happened. When he finished, Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but firm. Understanding begins with listening, he said. Not to what you expect to hear, but to what is actually there. The officer nodded, the meaning settling in. I see that now, he said quietly. Marcus held his gaze, not as a superior, not as an adversary, but as a man who understood that growth often began in uncomfortable moments. Then this was not a mistake, Marcus said. It was a lesson. The officer absorbed the words, his posture easing as the conversation shifted from tension to reflection. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet understanding forming within the walls of that room. Marcus stood, extending his hand. The officer took it, the gesture simple but significant. Thank you, he said. Marcus nodded. Do not thank me, he replied. Thank the moment that allowed you to see clearly. As he left the building, the late afternoon sun warmed the city, the skyline glowing with possibility. Marcus Reynolds walked through the streets with the same calm certainty that had guided him from the beginning, knowing that true change did not arrive in grand declarations, but in quiet realizations, in moments where understanding replaced assumption, and respect became something more than a reaction, something steady, lasting, and real. The conversation with the officer did not end with words. It lingered in the quiet understanding that settled between them, a space where assumptions had been replaced by reflection. As Marcus Reynolds stepped back into the afternoon light, the city felt different again, not because anything had changed on the surface, but because something had shifted beneath it. The streets carried their usual rhythm, cars moving in steady lines, people walking with purpose, the hum of life continuing without pause. Yet there was a subtle awareness in the air, a recognition that moments like the one from the night before did not simply pass. They echoed, they taught, they reshaped perspectives in ways that were often invisible but always lasting. Marcus walked toward his car with the same measured pace that had defined his presence throughout his life. He did not rush. He did not linger. He moved with intention, each step grounded in the quiet confidence that came from knowing who he was and why he stood where he did. The Rolls-Royce waited at the curb, its polished surface reflecting the golden hue of the late afternoon sun, a symbol not of wealth but of the journey that had brought him here. As he opened the door and settled into the seat, he allowed himself a moment to breathe in the stillness, the leather interior carrying the faint scent of craftsmanship and time. He thought about the officer's words, not as a confession, but as a step forward. Growth, he knew, rarely arrived in dramatic gestures. It arrived in moments of realization, in quiet shifts of understanding that altered the way people saw the world and their place within it. He started the engine, the soft purr filling the space, and drove through the city that stretched out before him like a living canvas. Every street a story, every building a chapter. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sidewalks, and the sky began to soften into shades of amber and blue. Marcus drove without a destination, letting the city guide him, passing through neighborhoods that had once stood forgotten and now thrived with new energy. He saw children playing in parks that had once been empty lots, families gathering in spaces that had once been silent, businesses growing where opportunity had once been scarce. These were the quiet victories, the ones that did not make headlines but changed lives. His phone buzzed gently on the console, a message from Sophia appearing on the screen. The media response has been positive. Community leaders are reaching out. Marcus read the words, then set the phone back down, his focus returning to the road ahead. He did not measure success by approval or praise. He measured it by impact, by the subtle shifts that occurred when people began to see each other differently. As he turned onto a bridge overlooking the river, the water below shimmered with the last light of day, reflecting the skyline like a mirror. He pulled over briefly, stepping out into the warm evening air, the breeze carrying the faint scent of the city, a mixture of asphalt and blooming trees, of motion and stillness intertwined. He rested his hands on the railing, looking out over the water, his reflection faint in its surface. He thought about the younger version of himself, the man who had once stood in a similar place, uncertain of the future, aware of the challenges but determined to rise above them. He had not known then how many moments like this he would face, how many times he would be asked to prove his place in spaces that had not expected him. But he had known one thing clearly, that his response would define not only how others saw him, but how he saw himself. The city lights began to flicker on, one by one, like stars finding their place in the evening sky. Marcus stood there for a moment longer, letting the calm settle into him, before returning to the car. As he drove back toward downtown, the streets grew brighter, the night coming alive with energy, restaurants filling with laughter, music drifting from open doors, the city moving in its endless rhythm. He parked outside a small jazz lounge he often visited, a place where the music spoke in notes that carried history and hope in equal measure. Inside, the atmosphere was warm, intimate, the sound of a saxophone weaving through the air like a story being told without words. Marcus took a seat near the stage, the dim light casting soft shadows across the room. He did not announce his presence. He did not need to. The music filled the space, the rhythm steady and soulful, and for a moment, the world outside faded into the background. He listened, not just to the melody, but to the emotion behind it, the way each note held both struggle and triumph, pain and resilience. It reminded him that life, like music, was not about avoiding discord. It was about finding harmony within it. A waitress approached, her smile genuine, her voice warm. "Good evening, Mr. Reynolds." "The usual?" Marcus nodded, grateful for the familiarity. "Thank you." As she walked away, he leaned back slightly, his eyes drifting toward the stage, where the musicians played with quiet intensity, each one contributing to the whole, each note a reflection of their shared journey. He thought about the city, about the officer, about the meeting earlier that day, and he felt a sense of peace settle within him. Not because the moment had passed, but because it had been understood. Because it had opened a door, not only for the officer, but for the city itself, to see more clearly, to listen more deeply, to recognize the value of awareness. When the music paused between sets, the room filled with soft conversation, glasses clinking, laughter rising and falling like waves. Marcus remained still, his presence calm, his mind steady. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments where the world would test its own assumptions. But he also knew that each moment carried the potential for growth, for change, for understanding. As the band began to play again, the first notes drifting through the room like a gentle reminder, Marcus Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, letting the music wash over him. And in that quiet space, he felt the city breathe, alive and evolving. A place where every story mattered, where every moment had the power to shift the way people saw each other, if only they chose to listen. The music faded into a softer rhythm as the evening settled deeper into the city, and Marcus Reynolds remained in his seat, his presence calm, his thoughts moving with the quiet tempo of the room. The jazz lounge was not loud, not crowded, but alive in a way that felt honest, the kind of place where people came to breathe, to listen, to let the day fall away in notes and shadows. The saxophone carried a melody that felt familiar, not because he had heard it before, but because it echoed something within him, something rooted in years of navigating spaces where he was both seen and misunderstood. He watched the musicians, the way they communicated without words, their glances and nods shaping the flow of the music, and he thought about how understanding often worked the same way, subtle, unspoken, built on awareness rather than explanation. The waitress returned with his drink, placing it gently on the table. "It is good to see you again, Mr. Reynolds," she said softly. Marcus nodded, offering a small smile. "It is good to be here." He lifted the glass, the cool surface grounding him in the moment, and took a slow sip, letting the calm of the room settle into him. Outside, the city continued to move, unaware of the quiet reflections taking place within the walls of the lounge. The footage from the parking lot had reached more people by now, not as a spectacle, but as a conversation, a moment that had invited reflection rather than reaction. Marcus had not watched it. He did not need to. He had lived it, and that was enough. A man approached the stage, his presence confident but respectful, and the band welcomed him with a nod. He picked up a microphone, his voice smooth as he introduced the next piece, a song about resilience, about standing steady when the world tried to define you in ways that did not fit. Marcus listened, the words blending with the music, and for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the journey that had brought him here, not as a burden, but as a testament to the quiet strength he had carried all along. He remembered his first job, the way he had been overlooked in meetings, the way his ideas had been heard but not credited, the way he had learned to speak not louder, but clearer, until his presence could no longer be ignored. He remembered the first building he had purchased, the skepticism in the banker's voice, the doubt in the investor's eyes, and the way he had walked away from those moments not defeated, but more determined. The song reached its crescendo, the notes rising like a declaration, and the room filled with a quiet energy, not loud, not overwhelming, but powerful in its simplicity. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound wash over him, and in that space, he felt a sense of alignment, a reminder that every moment, even the difficult ones, had shaped him into the man he was now. When the music softened again, he opened his eyes, his gaze drifting across the room, where people sat in quiet appreciation, their faces relaxed, their conversations hushed. A couple near the bar whispered to each other, their eyes flicking toward him, not with curiosity, but with recognition. They had seen the footage. They had understood the moment. But they did not approach him. They did not intrude. They simply acknowledged him with a small nod, a silent expression of respect. Marcus returned the nod. The exchange brief, but meaningful. It was not the recognition he sought, but the understanding behind it. As the evening continued, the band played on, each song a story, each note a reflection of the lives it touched. Marcus remained until the final set, the rhythm of the music carrying him through the quiet hours, the city outside growing still as midnight approached. When the last note faded and the room filled with gentle applause, he stood, placing a tip on the table, and thanked the waitress with a warm smile. "Have a good night," she said. "You as well," he replied. Outside, the air was cool, the streets quieter now, the city lights casting a soft glow across the pavement. Marcus walked to his car, the Rolls-Royce waiting under the street lamp, its presence understated yet undeniable. He paused for a moment, looking up at the skyline, the buildings standing tall against the night, each one a symbol of progress, of effort, of dreams realized through patience and vision. He thought about the day that had passed, about the meeting with the mayor, the conversation with the officer, the quiet reflections that had followed. He felt no resentment, no lingering tension. What he felt was clarity, the kind that came from understanding that change was not a single moment, but a series of moments, each one building upon the last. He opened the car door and settled into the seat, the interior embracing him in its quiet comfort. As he drove through the city, the streets nearly empty, he allowed his mind to drift, not to the past, but to the future, to the possibilities that lay ahead, to the ways he could continue to shape the spaces around him with intention and care. He passed by the community center, its lights still on, a reminder that there were always people working, learning, growing, even in the quiet hours. He slowed for a moment, watching through the windows as a group of teenagers gathered around a table, their laughter filling the room, their energy vibrant and unguarded. It was for them that he had built these spaces, for the generations who would come after him, who would walk into rooms and not question whether they belonged. He drove on, the city gradually giving way to quieter streets, to the familiar path that led to his penthouse. When he arrived, the elevator carried him upward in silence, the glass walls reflecting the lights of the city below. As the doors opened, he stepped into the calm of his home, the space filled with the quiet presence of everything he had built, everything he had worked for. He walked to the window, the skyline stretching before him, and for a moment, he simply stood, letting the stillness settle around him. The night was peaceful, the city breathing softly, and Marcus Reynolds felt a deep sense of purpose, not because of what had happened, but because of what it had revealed. That respect, true respect, was not something to be demanded or defended. It was something to be lived, quietly, consistently, in every space, in every moment, until the world had no choice but to see it for what it was. And as the city lights flickered like distant stars, he knew that tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, new moments to stand steady, to listen, to lead, not with force, but with presence, with the quiet strength that had carried him through every chapter of his journey. The night carried forward into morning with a quiet continuity, as if the city itself had chosen to hold its breath for just a little longer, waiting to see how the next chapter would unfold. Marcus Reynolds woke before the sun had fully risen, the soft gray light filtering through the glass walls of his penthouse and stretching across the room in long, gentle lines. He stood by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching as the skyline slowly awakened, each building catching the light in its own way, each street beginning to fill with motion and purpose. He did not rush into the day. He allowed the stillness of the early hour to settle into him, grounding him in the quiet certainty that had always guided his decisions. The events of the past days had not faded. They had deepened, becoming part of the rhythm of the city, part of the conversation that now moved through offices, homes, and community spaces with thoughtful curiosity. He had not spoken much about it publicly beyond the address, but his presence had said enough. People had listened, not because he demanded it, but because he had shown them something worth hearing. As the sun rose higher, painting the skyline in shades of gold, Marcus dressed with his usual simplicity, choosing a charcoal suit that reflected authority without excess. He left the penthouse and made his way through the city, the Rolls-Royce gliding smoothly along the streets, its quiet engine echoing his own calm. The city felt aware, not in a tense way, but in a thoughtful one, as if it had taken a moment to look at itself more closely. When he arrived at the office, Sophia was waiting, her posture composed, her expression thoughtful. "Good morning," she said, handing him a tablet with the day's schedule. "The response to yesterday's address continues to grow. Community leaders have requested to meet with you this afternoon." Marcus took the tablet, glancing briefly at the list of names, people from different neighborhoods, different backgrounds, all connected by a shared desire to understand, to move forward. Schedule them, he said. Sophia nodded, her respect for his approach evident in the quiet efficiency of her movements. There is also one more request, she added. The officer you met with yesterday has sent a message. He asked me to tell you that he has begun organizing a community forum. He would like you to attend. Marcus paused for a moment, not out of hesitation, but reflection. I will be there, he said. Sophia's expression softened slightly. He sounded sincere. Marcus nodded. Sincerity is the beginning, he replied. The day moved forward with the steady rhythm of purpose, meetings flowing one into the next, each conversation rooted in the same quiet theme of awareness and growth. Marcus listened more than he spoke, allowing others to share their perspectives, their experiences, their hopes for what the city could become. He did not position himself as a hero or a victim. He positioned himself as a bridge, someone who understood both the challenges and the possibilities that lay between perception and reality. In the afternoon, the community leaders gathered in a conference room overlooking the city. They spoke of trust, of history, of the moments that had shaped their views. Marcus listened, his presence steady, his responses thoughtful. Change is not a moment, he said. It is a direction. The words resonated, not as a slogan, but as a truth that felt both simple and profound. They discussed programs, initiatives, ways to create spaces where understanding could grow naturally rather than be forced. Marcus offered support, resources, but more importantly, he offered his presence, a reminder that leadership was not about standing above, but about standing with. As the meeting ended, one of the community leaders, an older man with kind eyes and a voice shaped by years of experience, approached Marcus. You handled that night with grace, he said. Marcus met his gaze, his expression calm. Grace is not something you learn, he replied. It is something you choose. The man nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. That evening, as Marcus drove to the community forum organized by the officer, the sky softened into twilight, the city lights beginning to flicker on like quiet invitations. The forum was held in a modest community center, its walls lined with photographs of local events, its atmosphere warm and welcoming. When Marcus entered, conversations paused, not out of shock, but out of respect. The officer stood near the front, his posture composed, his expression sincere. He stepped forward, extending a hand. Thank you for coming, he said. Marcus shook his hand, the gesture simple but meaningful. Thank you for inviting me, he replied. The room filled with people from all walks of life, neighbors, students, officers, community members, all gathered not to debate, but to understand. The officer spoke first, his voice steady, his words honest. He spoke about training, about responsibility, about the importance of seeing people beyond assumptions. He did not avoid the moment that had brought them together. He acknowledged it, not with defensiveness, but with clarity. Marcus listened, his presence calm, allowing the room to absorb the sincerity of the message. When he was invited to speak, he stood, his voice steady, his tone measured. Respect is not something you earn once, he said. It is something you practice every day. The room was quiet, not from tension, but from reflection. He spoke about listening, about awareness, about the power of choosing to see each other clearly. He did not speak as someone above the moment. He spoke as someone within it, someone who understood that growth came from shared understanding. As the forum ended, people approached, not to praise, not to question, but to connect. Conversations flowed naturally, hands were shaken, stories were shared. The officer stood nearby, watching, his expression thoughtful, as if he too was seeing the city in a new light. When Marcus left the center later that night, the air was cool, the streets quiet, and the city felt alive in a different way. Not louder, not brighter, but deeper. He drove home with the same calm certainty that had guided him through every challenge, knowing that moments like this did not end with applause or headlines. They ended with understanding, with the quiet shift that occurred when people chose to see each other not through the lens of assumption, but through the clarity of shared humanity. And as the skyline stretched before him, glowing softly against the night, Marcus Reynolds knew that the journey was far from over, but it was moving forward, one moment, one conversation, one quiet realization at a time. The city did not sleep after the forum, it transformed. In quiet corners and crowded rooms alike, conversations continued, not loud, not heated, but thoughtful, reflective, shaped by the understanding that had begun to ripple outward from a single moment that had refused to remain small. Marcus Reynolds felt that shift the next morning as he stepped out onto the balcony of his penthouse, the early light brushing against the skyline like a painter's first stroke. The air was cool, carrying with it the subtle hum of a city that had begun to listen to itself. He rested his hands on the railing, his gaze steady, his thoughts calm. He did not see the city as a collection of buildings or streets. He saw it as a living conversation, one that grew and changed with every decision, every interaction, every moment of awareness. The forum had not been about him. It had been about the space it created, a place where voices could meet without needing to rise above one another. His phone buzzed softly behind him, the sound gentle but persistent. He turned, picking it up, and saw Sophia's name on the screen. He answered without hesitation. "Good morning," she said, her tone composed, but there was a note of something else beneath it, something that hinted at news. "The mayor's office has issued a citywide initiative," she continued. "They are calling it the Clarity Project. It focuses on training, awareness, and community engagement. They want you to be involved in the Leadership Council." Marcus listened, not surprised, but thoughtful. "What is their goal?" he asked. "To create spaces where understanding can grow before conflict does," Sophia replied. Marcus allowed the words to settle. It was not a solution. It was a direction. "Tell them I will participate," he said. "But only if the voices of the community are at the center." Sophia's tone warmed slightly. "They expected you would say that." After the call ended, Marcus stood there for a moment longer, looking out at the city that now carried the quiet imprint of the past few days. He did not see change as something sudden or dramatic. He saw it as something that moved like light at dawn, gradually, steadily, until the darkness no longer defined the space. He dressed and made his way down to the street, the Rolls-Royce waiting as it always did, its presence understated but certain. As he drove through the city, he noticed the subtle ways in which the moment had lingered. A group of officers stood outside a precinct, engaged in conversation with community members, their posture open, their tone calm. A mural on a building wall, once faded, had been repainted, its colors vibrant, its message clear. He passed by the community center, where the doors stood open, children arriving with laughter, their voices filling the morning air. These were not grand changes. They were small shifts, but they mattered. They signaled awareness. When Marcus arrived at Reynolds Holdings, the building felt alive with purpose. Employees moved through the lobby with a quiet energy, their conversations focused, their expressions thoughtful. Sophia met him at the elevator, her presence steady. "The Leadership Council meeting is this afternoon," she said. "Community representatives, city officials, educators. It will be a full room." Marcus nodded. "That is the point," he replied. The meeting was held in a large hall overlooking the river, the space filled with natural light, the atmosphere calm but expectant. People from different parts of the city gathered, their backgrounds varied, their perspectives shaped by different experiences. Marcus took his seat among them, not at the head of the table, but within the circle, his presence equal, his posture open. The mayor spoke first, his voice steady. "This initiative is not about correcting one moment," he said. "It is about preventing many." Marcus listened, his gaze moving across the room, taking in the faces, the expressions, the shared sense of purpose. When it was his turn to speak, he did not stand. He remained seated, his voice calm, his words deliberate. "Understanding begins with listening," he said, "not to respond, but to learn." The room was quiet, not from tension, but from reflection. He spoke about the importance of awareness, about the power of choosing to see beyond the surface, about the responsibility that came with authority and influence. He did not speak as a man who had been wronged. He spoke as a man who had witnessed a moment that revealed something deeper, something that required attention, not anger. The discussion that followed was thoughtful, collaborative, shaped by a shared desire to create something lasting. Educators spoke about the importance of teaching empathy early. Community leaders spoke about the need for safe spaces where conversations could happen without fear. Officers spoke about training that went beyond procedure, that focused on perception and presence. Marcus listened to each voice, offering insight when needed, always returning to the same quiet truth. Respect is not given, he said at one point. It is recognized. The meeting lasted for hours, but it did not feel long. It felt necessary. When it ended, people lingered, not in obligation, but in connection, conversations continuing in small groups, ideas forming, plans taking shape. The mayor approached Marcus, his expression thoughtful. You turned a moment into a movement, he said. Marcus shook his head gently. The moment was always bigger than me, he replied. I simply chose not to walk away from it. Outside, the sun was beginning to lower, casting warm light across the river, the water reflecting the city like a living mirror. Marcus walked along the path for a while, his steps unhurried, his thoughts calm. He passed by families enjoying the evening, children playing, couples talking quietly, the city alive in its own rhythm. No one stopped him. No one pointed or whispered. They simply acknowledged him with small nods, quiet smiles, a recognition that did not demand attention. He returned to his car as the sky softened into twilight, the first stars beginning to appear. As he drove through the city, the lights of Dallas glowed warmly, each one a reminder of the lives, the stories, the moments that made it what it was. He did not think about the past as something separate. He thought of it as part of the present, a foundation that allowed the future to stand steady. When he arrived home, the penthouse welcomed him with its quiet calm, the skyline stretching before him like an open horizon. He stood by the window, his hands resting lightly at his sides, his gaze steady. The city breathed, alive and evolving, and Marcus Reynolds felt a deep sense of alignment, not because everything was perfect, but because it was moving, growing, learning. The moment in the parking lot had not ended with an apology or a headline. It had continued, unfolding into conversations, into initiatives, into a shared awareness that would shape the city in ways that could not yet be fully seen. And as the night settled gently over Dallas, Marcus knew that the journey was not about moments of recognition. It was about moments of understanding, quiet, steady, and powerful, the kind that changed not only how people saw him, but how they saw each other. The city moved into the next chapter with a quiet confidence, as if it had learned to listen to its own heartbeat more closely, to recognize the subtle rhythms that guided its growth. Marcus Reynolds felt that change not as a shift in atmosphere, but as a deepening of something that had always existed beneath the surface. He stood in his office overlooking the skyline, the morning light casting soft reflections across the glass walls, and allowed himself a moment to absorb the stillness before the day began. The Clarity Project had taken root, not as a program on paper, but as a presence within the city's daily life. Conversations had become more intentional, interactions more aware, and the spaces he had built over the years now carried an added sense of purpose. Sophia entered quietly, her tablet in hand, her expression calm but thoughtful. "Good morning," she said, placing the tablet on the desk. "The Leadership Council would like to meet again this afternoon. They have drafted the first outline for the Community Engagement Initiative." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "Schedule it," he replied. "Let us keep the momentum moving." The meeting took place in the same hall by the river, but the energy was different now. There was less uncertainty, more clarity, and a shared understanding that what had begun as a response to a single moment had evolved into something larger, something that belonged to the entire city. Marcus took his seat among the group, his presence calm, his posture open. The mayor spoke about progress, about the importance of sustaining the momentum, about ensuring that awareness did not fade into routine. Community leaders shared their experiences, the ways in which conversations had opened new pathways of understanding, the ways in which young people had begun to see themselves reflected in spaces that once felt distant. Educators spoke about new programs that encouraged empathy and dialogue. Officers spoke about training sessions that focused on perception as much as procedure, and Marcus listened, his expression thoughtful, his responses measured. "Change does not stay still," he said. "It moves with intention, or it fades." The words settled into the room, not as a warning, but as a reminder. After the meeting, as the group dispersed into smaller conversations, the mayor approached Marcus with a quiet smile. "You have given this city something it did not know it needed," he said. Marcus shook his head gently. "The city already had it," he replied. "It simply needed a moment to see it clearly." Outside, the afternoon lights stretched across the river, the water reflecting the sky in soft ripples. Marcus walked along the path, his steps unhurried, the sounds of the city blending into a gentle hum. He saw families enjoying the open spaces, children riding bicycles along the trails, couples sitting on benches in quiet conversation. There was a sense of ease in the air, a subtle awareness that connection had replaced distance in ways that were not loud but deeply felt. His phone buzzed softly, a message from the officer appearing on the screen. "Thank you for the forum. I see things differently now." Marcus read the words, then slipped the phone back into his pocket, not needing to respond immediately. Understanding did not require constant acknowledgement. It required space to grow. As the sun began to lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Marcus returned to his car, the Rolls-Royce waiting like a familiar presence. He drove through neighborhoods that had once been divided by more than distance, now connected by shared spaces and shared purpose. He saw officers speaking with residents in front of community centers, not as authority figures, but as neighbors. He saw young people gathered in the parks, their laughter carrying across the evening air, their energy vibrant and unguarded. These were the moments that mattered, the quiet signs that the city was learning to see itself more clearly. When he arrived home, the penthouse welcomed him with its calm stillness, the skyline glowing softly beyond the glass. He stood by the window, his hands resting lightly at his sides, his gaze steady. The city breathed below him, alive with movement and possibility, and he felt a quiet sense of alignment, not because the journey was complete, but because it was unfolding with intention. The moment in the parking lot had not defined him. It had revealed something deeper, something that extended beyond one night, beyond one conversation. It had shown the city what could happen when awareness met action, when understanding replaced assumption. Marcus did not feel like a symbol. He felt like a participant in something larger, something that moved through every interaction, every decision, every space where people chose to listen rather than react. He poured a glass of water and sat by the window, watching as the city lights flickered on, one by one, like stars finding their place in the night sky. He thought about the journey ahead, about the conversations that would continue, the initiatives that would grow, the lives that would be touched in ways both visible and unseen. He knew that not every moment would be easy, not every path clear. But he also knew that clarity was not about perfection. It was about presence, about the willingness to stand in a moment and see it fully, without turning away. As the night deepened, the city settled into its rhythm, the hum of life continuing beneath the surface. Marcus Reynolds remained by the window, his reflection blending with the lights of the skyline, his presence calm, his purpose steady. The story had not ended. It had evolved, becoming part of the city's fabric, a quiet reminder that respect was not something to be given or taken. It was something to be recognized, always, in every space, in every moment, by everyone who chose to see. The city did not slow down, but it did begin to move with a deeper awareness, like a place that had learned to pause before speaking, to consider before reacting, and Marcus Reynolds could feel that change in the subtle rhythms of his days. Weeks had passed since the moment that had started it all, and yet its influence continued to unfold in quiet, meaningful ways. The Clarity Project had expanded beyond initial discussions and training sessions into real action, shaping policies, reshaping conversations, and encouraging a level of engagement that the city had not experienced before. Marcus stood once again by the window of his office, the skyline stretching before him like an open horizon, each building a reminder of the work that had gone into creating spaces where people could gather, connect, and grow. He did not see the skyline as a symbol of success. He saw it as a reflection of responsibility. Sophia entered with her usual calm presence, placing a folder on the desk. "The quarterly review of the initiative is ready," she said. "The results are already visible. Complaints have decreased, community participation has increased, and training sessions are being requested by departments outside the city." Marcus opened the folder, scanning the pages with quiet focus. Numbers told part of the story, but not all of it. The real measure of progress was in the conversations that now happened naturally, in the way people greeted each other, in the shift from suspicion to understanding that could not be captured in statistics alone. "Schedule a visit to the training session this afternoon," he said. "I want to see how it is being received." The session was held in a renovated community hall, one of the many spaces Marcus had helped restore over the years. The room was filled with officers, educators, and community leaders seated together, not in separate groups, but in a circle that encouraged dialogue rather than division. Marcus entered quietly, taking a seat among them, his presence steady, his posture open. The facilitator spoke about awareness, about the importance of listening without judgment, about recognizing the difference between perception and reality. Participants shared experiences, some difficult, some hopeful, all rooted in a desire to move forward. Marcus listened carefully, absorbing the tone of the room, the sincerity in the voices, the willingness to engage in conversations that were not always easy but always necessary. When invited to speak, he stood, his voice calm and measured. "Change is not a destination," he said. "It is a practice." The words settled into the room, simple yet resonant, encouraging reflection rather than reaction. After the session, several participants approached him, not with praise, but with gratitude, sharing how the initiative had helped them see their roles differently, how it had given them tools to build trust in ways that felt authentic and lasting. Marcus thanked them in return, acknowledging that growth was always a shared effort, never the work of one person alone. As he left the hall, the afternoon light stretched across the pavement, casting long shadows that blended together, creating patterns that felt symbolic of the unity the city was beginning to experience. His phone buzzed with a message from the mayor. The council has approved the next phase. Community investment funds will support local programs aligned with the initiative. Marcus read the message and felt a quiet satisfaction, not because of recognition, but because of progress. He replied with a simple acknowledgement, then returned his attention to the road ahead. That evening, Marcus visited one of the neighborhoods that had been most impacted by the new programs. He walked through the streets with a calm presence, greeting residents who recognized him not as a distant figure, but as someone who had invested in their community long before the initiative began. Children played in newly renovated parks, their laughter echoing through the evening air, while local business owners stood outside their storefronts, engaging in friendly conversations with officers who now walked the streets as partners rather than enforcers. Marcus paused near a mural that had been painted recently, its vibrant colors depicting scenes of unity, resilience, and shared growth. A young artist stood nearby, adding final touches to the design. Marcus approached, offering a warm greeting. "It is beautiful," he said. The artist smiled, stepping back to look at the mural. "It is about seeing each other clearly," she replied. Marcus nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. He did not stay long. He did not need to. His presence alone carried the message that he believed in the progress he saw, that he supported the voices shaping the city's future. As night settled over Dallas, Marcus returned to his penthouse, the skyline glowing softly beyond the glass. He stood by the window, his reflection merging with the lights of the city, and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey that had begun with a misunderstanding in a parking lot had grown into something far larger, something that touched lives in ways that could not be measured by headlines or statistics. It had reminded the city of its capacity for growth, for empathy, for change that was both intentional and lasting. Marcus did not feel like the center of that story. He felt like a participant in a shared effort, a voice among many, contributing to a movement that belonged to everyone willing to engage in it. He poured a glass of water and sat near the window, watching as the city moved through its nightly rhythm, cars passing along the streets, lights flickering in apartment windows, the quiet pulse of life continuing beneath the surface. He thought about the future, about the ways the initiative would continue to evolve, about the conversations that would still need to happen, about the challenges that would arise and the opportunities that would follow. He knew that progress was never permanent. It required attention, care, and commitment. But he also knew that the foundation had been set, that the city had begun to see itself differently, to recognize the value of understanding, to embrace the idea that respect was not something to be demanded, but something to be practiced daily. As the night deepened and the skyline shimmered against the dark sky, Marcus Reynolds felt a sense of alignment that went beyond personal achievement. It was the alignment that came from knowing that his actions, his choices, and his presence had contributed to something meaningful, something that would continue to grow long after the moment that had sparked it had faded into memory. And as the city breathed quietly beneath him, he understood that the true impact of that moment would not be measured by what had happened, but by what continued to happen because of it, day by day, conversation by conversation, until understanding became not an initiative, but a way of life for everyone who called the city home. To success, he saw it as a reminder of responsibility, of the quiet work that continued long after the headlines had faded. His phone buzzed softly, a message from Sophia appearing on the screen. The annual city forum is today. They would like you to close the event. Marcus read the words, then looked out at the city below, alive with motion, people moving through their morning routines, unaware of how their small interactions were shaping something larger. He replied simply, I will be there. The forum was held in the heart of downtown, in a hall that overlooked the river, its glass walls open to the light, its atmosphere calm, but filled with quiet anticipation. People from every part of the city gathered, educators, officers, business owners, students, families, all drawn by the shared understanding that something meaningful had taken root in their community. Marcus arrived without ceremony, taking a seat among them, his presence calm, his posture open. The mayor spoke first, his voice steady, reflecting on the journey the city had taken, on the conversations that had opened doors, on the awareness that had grown from a single moment of reflection. Community leaders followed, sharing stories of change, of trust rebuilt, of young people finding their voices in spaces that once felt distant. The officer who had once stood in that parking lot spoke as well, his tone sincere, his words shaped by experience. He spoke about learning to listen, about understanding the difference between assumption and awareness, about the responsibility that came with authority. Marcus listened, his expression thoughtful, recognizing the growth in the room, the sincerity in the voices, the quiet unity that had replaced division. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, his presence steady, his voice calm and clear. This city did not change because of one moment, he said. It changed because people chose to see each other differently. The words settled into the hall, not loud, not forceful, but resonant. He spoke about respect, about the power of listening, about the importance of creating spaces where understanding could grow naturally. He did not speak as a leader above the city. He spoke as a part of it, as someone who had witnessed its challenges and its strengths, its doubts, and its possibilities. Respect is not a reward, he said. It is a responsibility. The audience was quiet, not from tension, but from reflection. He spoke about the future, about the need to continue the work, to ensure that awareness did not fade into routine, to remember that progress was not measured in days or months, but in the way people treated each other when no one was watching. When he finished, the applause was not loud, but steady, a reflection of appreciation rather than excitement. People approached him afterward, not to praise, but to share their stories, their experiences, their hopes for the future. He listened to each one, offering quiet encouragement, recognizing that leadership was not about being heard, but about hearing others. As the forum ended and the crowd began to disperse, the mayor walked with him toward the river, the afternoon light shimmering across the water. You have helped this city find its reflection, he said. Marcus shook his head gently. The reflection was always there, he replied. We just needed to look more closely. They stood by the river for a moment, watching as people passed by, children playing, couples talking, officers greeting residents with ease. The city felt alive, not with noise, but with connection. As Marcus walked back to his car, the Rolls-Royce waiting quietly at the curb, he felt a deep sense of alignment, not because the journey was complete, but because it had become shared. He drove through the city one last time that evening, the skyline glowing softly, the streets filled with life, each light a reminder of the stories unfolding within the buildings, the homes, the spaces he had helped create. He passed the community center, its windows bright with activity, its doors open to anyone who needed a place to belong. He slowed for a moment, watching as children laughed, as families gathered, as conversations flowed freely, unburdened by doubt. When he arrived home, the penthouse welcomed him with its quiet calm, the city stretching before him like an open horizon. He stood by the window, his reflection blending with the lights of Dallas, his presence steady, his purpose clear. The moment that had begun in a parking lot had not defined him. It had revealed something deeper, something that extended beyond one night, beyond one conversation. It had shown the city what was possible when people chose to see each other with clarity, when they chose to listen, to understand, to grow together. Marcus Reynolds did not feel like the center of that story. He felt like a participant in something larger, something that would continue to evolve long after the moment had faded into memory. He poured a glass of water and sat by the window, watching as the city moved through its nightly rhythm, the quiet pulse of life continuing beneath the surface. He knew that the work would never truly be finished. There would always be moments of misunderstanding, of challenge, of doubt. But there would also be moments of awareness, of connection, of growth. And as long as those moments existed, the city would continue to move forward, guided not by reaction, but by understanding. As the night deepened and the skyline shimmered against the dark sky, Marcus Reynolds felt a quiet certainty settle within him. He did not need to raise his voice to be heard. He did not need to prove his place in the spaces he entered. His presence, his actions, his choices had already spoken. The city had listened, and in listening, it had changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. And as the lights of Dallas flickered like distant stars, he knew that the true power of that moment had never been about authority or recognition. It had been about dignity, about the quiet strength of standing firm, about the belief that respect was not something to be granted, but something to be recognized, always, in every space, in every moment, by everyone who chose to see.